Hi everyone, and welcome to our next module. So far, we've learned a lot about key pairs and wallets, transactions, and programs. And throughout this, we've mentioned the term SOL and maybe even briefly mentioned the word tokens. But what exactly are tokens? Well, throughout this module, we'll be taking a deep dive into tokens and even creating our own currency and our own NFT. But before we do that, we need to understand really what tokens are. So far, we know that tokens is some sort of money. So before we actually go into tokens itself, let's look at the history of money and how it has evolved to the tokens that we know about in the crypto world. This story begins a long time ago with Aristotle's definition of sound money. Aristotle's first three definitions of sound money is something that is durable, transferable, and divisible. Aristotle then talks about how sound money should be something that has intrinsic value, meaning that the money itself has value. In order for money to have some intrinsic value, it should be scarce, recognizable, and fungible. So I've just said a lot of terms. So let's go into what each of these means so we can understand what sound money means a little bit more. The first three are pretty straightforward. We have durable, which basically means that it's stable and doesn't rot or melt or rust. Then we have the term transferable, which means that we can transfer ownership from one person to another. Then we have the term divisible, which means that we can divide it into smaller units of money. And then we have the next three terms, which are a little bit more complicated. The first is scarce, which means that there is limited quantity available for use. Because there's a limited availability, it has more value because it's more rare. The next term is recognizable. This means that it's really easy to recognize and verify authenticity. For example, if we see a paper bill, we can easily recognize this as money. Finally, the last term is fungible, which you'll actually hear a lot about in this lesson. Fungible means that one unit of money can be substituted for another. Essentially, what this means is that if we have $1 and another dollar, these have the same value. So now that we have a little bit of an understanding of what money is, let's start to see some examples of money and currency in history. Here, we have some really early forms of currency. This stone is actually a receipt, and these ingots were used to trade in the Bronze Age. Eventually, we went from trading into actual coin money. And this is where we would start to see things like shells and also eventually actual coins, which starts to come up in the Iron Age. This is where currency started to really take off. Eventually, we reached paper money, which is the money that we've currently been using for quite a while. All of these examples so far are examples of physical money. This means that we would pay with something physical, and if we wanted to trade or exchange money, we'd also have to be in person. Eventually, we started to explore the idea of the virtualization of money. This started a lot earlier than you might think. Case in point, in the late 1800s, when telegraph companies and other technologies were becoming more common, the bank Western Union, which originally was a telegraph company, began to transfer money through its telegraph lines. This is so important because it marks the first step in the virtualization of money. And it allowed for things like money to be transferred across borders, across geographic places, without people having to actually be together in person. It also started to mean that money had more presence than just in paper bills. Today we have things like Venmo, or if you're from the Philippines, Gcash. And we also have things like credit cards. All of these things signify towards a more virtual idea of money. So you might be able to see where this is going. As money advanced, crypto began to come into picture. Crypto first came into picture when blockchain was introduced when Bitcoin was created in 2009. But before we talk about cryptocurrencies itself, let's look into what blockchain is. Blockchain allowed for a more secure exchange of information. I have this long definition here if you want to pause and read it, but in short, in the blockchain, transactions, which can be things like information or money transactions, are recorded in blocks. And each block contains a signature of the previous block, linking them together in what we know as a chain, hence the term blockchain. These transactions get distributed in a totally decentralized way. And in this sense, we have a much more secure way to store and exchange information, which is why we often say that blockchain helps lead Web3, which is the new internet. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let's focus right now on financial transactions. We can use the blockchain for information associated with finances and balances so that this information is stored securely. This leads us to cryptocurrency. Essentially, cryptocurrency is a digital asset which is used to work as a medium of exchange. Think like digital money. And the way crypto comes in is because these digital assets are made secure through cryptography and technologies like the blockchain. These digital assets also have the same attributes as the sound money that we talked about earlier. Think about it. It is durable because it is digital, so it cannot rot, rust, or melt. It is transferable, which we've seen in our past projects. It is also divisible. As we've seen, we can divide one soul into even smaller bits of lamp words. We can also make cryptocurrencies scarce by having a limited number of them, recognizable, and fungible, where one soul still means one soul. So far I brought in the concept of cryptocurrencies, but what about tokens, and what is the difference between cryptocurrencies and tokens? Well, let's compare the two. Cryptocurrencies is a native asset of the blockchain. You can think of this like ETH for Ethereum and Sol for Solana. Because they are the native asset of the blockchain, they also fuel the core aspects that make this blockchain the blockchain, like how Sol can fund for transactions or storage. Tokens, on the other hand, are built on top of an existing blockchain. In Solana, we call these SPL tokens. For example, you can think of stablecoins like USDC or NFTs. Both of these are tokens that are built on top of a blockchain like Ethereum or Solana. We also often call certain tokens in Solana SPL tokens, which you'll learn about more in the next video. So we've just learned a lot about money, cryptocurrencies, and tokens. I think now is a good time for you to take a video break so you guys can read a little bit more about tokens, specifically what fungible versus non-fungible tokens are. So see you in the next video.